Today we're going to start a water pump replacement on a 1996 Jeep Grand Cherokee Laredo. Ain't that right, me Joe?
Yes, ain't that right, me Joe? Yes, we are. We're going to get that done today. Yes, we are. We're going to start it.
Okay, so we replaced the radiator on it. And then shortly after that, the water pump went out. The cat is mine. And this is our neighbor friend, Mijo. Huh, Mijo? Yeah.
Yeah, she's a good dog. Yes, she is. She's a good dog.
Everybody gets along here pretty much. Okay, so anyway, we're going to go in here, take this radiator shroud off. Also take off, we're going to, well, as soon as the cat gets out of the way, we're going to replace these tension pulleys. They're squawking and making noise as well while we got it all apart. And so we'll stop that right there. Come back to this in a minute after we get some of this stuff off. Okay, I got the shroud and the clutch fan off. It's tight in there. You have to loosen the fan clutch. That was a 1/2-inch wrench. 4 bolts on this 96 Jeep Grand Cherokee Laredo. And then the shroud had 2 bolts that I used 10mm to get those loose. And you have to pull them out together at the same time. It's very tight in there. If you exercise a little bit of patience, you can keep from tearing up your radiator as well as tearing up your shroud. So next I'm going to loosen these bolts while everything's still tight to these tension pulleys. There's one there, and then there's that one down there, and that'll make it easier on me breaking those bolts loose. So now we're to a 15mm. That's what I had to use to bust those 2 bolts loose on the pulleys, the tension pulleys, so that'll make it easier, like I mentioned, keeping that fan belt on there. I also failed to mention taking the battery out. The way I could reach my hand around from the back side there and get to the one side of the fan clutch where the 2 bolts were. It's just better to get that battery out of the way, especially if you got bigger hands or arms, depending on your size. So now that I got those knocked loose, I'll take this belt off and start removing everything else. Ain't that right, me Joe?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, so we got 2 14mm bolts that you got to take out right there. You have to completely take those out. And then there's 3 bolts right here that are 1/2-inch. So I'm not taking those out because then I'll have to take the whole power steering pump off. I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen all 3 of these bolts. See that one down in there, 1/2-inch. Going to loosen them up well so that I can move this bracket when I take the water pump out, and that'll save me some work, but you can see it'll just be a little tighter getting it in there. We'll see how that works. So I got the new water pump out just to make sure about the bolt scenario for this 1996 Jeep Grand Cherokee Laredo. And anyway, there's four bolts that hold it on. I think you can see that. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's what's holding the water pump on. And of course you've got your brackets that I failed to mention, putting something down there to catch your antifreeze. When I go to take the water pump off, I'm leaving the hose hooked up to it. I'm not saying that's the right way, but I'm just trying to save losing as much antifreeze as possible. And plus it's easier to get to that hose once I pull that pump out. These are 1/2-inch bolts holding the water pump on. We seem to be going back and forth between metric and standard size, or whatever they call it. So there you go. So I got the one heater hose disconnected from that heater tube, is what I'm going to call it, which goes down and attaches to the water pump. Got the bolts out of the water pump, the old water pump. You can see the antifreeze is coming out, obviously. And I'll bust this water pump completely loose from the block here and proceed to disconnect that. Let's see, this doesn't have any other bolts on it. I don't see any other. Just those four. Oh, I'm going to have to take this off right here. Yeah, I'm going to have to go ahead and take this off, which I got a new one anyway, but that tube's going to be in the way. See there? The tube's going to hit that, trying to pull this all out at once. So while this is draining, I'll take this one off right here. Well, it was tight, but it did work. I was able to get the water pump with the hose still attached to it out of there without having to take that whole power steering pump off of there. So you can see how loose it had to get it. I did have to take the bolt completely off the block to get it loose enough to do that. So far so good. And then this clamp appears to be bad on here. That was brand new, and it's already, I tried loosening it, it wouldn't loosen up. So some would say I over tightened it, but you know, those old ones, these here, they seem to work pretty good, but they claim you shouldn't reuse them, but I did on this and didn't have any leaks. So well, that's your determination. We all have our frustrations working on cars anyway, don't we? So I'll finish getting this thing out of here. Of course, keep in mind, if you got pets, they like to get involved in whatever you're doing. Ain't that right, Patches? Yeah. Okay, I'm going to get to cleaning this up. I'd like to point out a couple things. I put a plastic bag over the bottom radiator hose to keep any of the debris when I was cleaning around the cleaning off the old gasket material. That way it doesn't get into your hose. Also, I went ahead and drained the hose off some more so that when I put on the new water pump, I can go ahead and put my clamps and all that right here before I put it back in there, because that is just so hard to get to that right in there once it's back in there, putting the hose on. So I'm going to put the hose on first and then slide my pump back in there by draining the antifreeze off, and I won't have it coming back up into the pump while I'm trying to get it attached there. So anyway, that's the plan. And okay, so I got my hose, bottom radiator hose, connected to the water pump there. And you'll notice I went back to the old clamp instead of trying to use one of them newer ones. And the reason I put this on ahead of time is because it's just too difficult to try to get all that on after it's installed. And I'm just taking advantage of having some room. There's the heater tube that comes out of the top of the water pump. So now I'm going to so I got my gasket material, a gasket put in there, and sealant, lined up all my bolts, have them in there loosely. Everything seems to be lined up pretty well. There's my new tube. Had to move it a little bit, but it lined up well. And so now I'll just tighten them on down. You can see why my concern about that hose. Look at it, how tight all that is in there. It's very hard to get to that clamp. And so I saved myself a headache right there. Isn't that right, me, Joe?
Yes, I saved myself a headache.
Okay, so I have the water pump in place. I hand tightened all the bolts in and then went around and snugged them all up. If you have a torque wrench, then you need to torque it down to manufacturer's suggested torque. If you have a feel for it, then you know what to do. If you don't have a feel for it, use a torque wrench. If you bust one of them bolts off in that block, you will be not very happy. Now I'm back on it again. You'll notice I don't have the fan on. I put all the pulleys on in the belt because there's just more room to get everything together in here. It's a little snug, but I still have room to tighten it all up and everything, and then I'll take these bolts off here and go ahead and put the fan on there, but it's just easier to line it up. There's just not much room in here. Once that shroud's on there, trying to get all this around just doesn't work very well. The new bearings are in. Looks like everything's going along real well. So the big question is, should I charge my daughter for all this labor? What do you think? Would you charge your son or daughter? So you can see I'm starting to put the fan and the shroud back down in there. And you can see when I put that belt on first, there just isn't very much room. Okay, I topped everything off. And of course you're going to have some air coming through there. I'll run it for a while. You don't want to go too far away. Kind of work the air out of your system. And I've gone through and double checked everything. Make sure all my bolts are tightened down. You'll notice there's my belt. I allow that much there to give. It'll stretch out some anyway, and I'll have to retighten it. But you don't want to over tighten it. That's one reason water pumps will go out on you if you have your belt too tight. Batteries all hooked back up, which I took that out to give me more arm room in there. Everything's all in place. The heater hose is hooked back up. Double checked everything, so now I'm gonna crank it up, see how she runs. Okay, you hear that noise? That's the shroud. The fan's kind of clicking it just a little bit. Yeah, everything's working real well. The noise was a combination of the shroud, and then there's a bearing down in there. And let me just turn this off. Turn the motor off. Okay, now with the motor turned off, you'll be able to hear me a little better. So this bearing down here, it was a combination of the fairing and this new pulley down here. When I had tightened things up, I tightened it up just a little bit too much, and that's where part of that noise was coming from. So I loosened everything up and readjusted it. But these belts stretch, and so that's all good because I just did it right here. It's not like I'm going hundreds of miles traveling, get all the little bugs worked out here at the house. And so in case you were wondering, do I charge my kids? No, I do the work for them. I don't mind fixing whatever's wrong with their cars. They're young adults. They pay for the supplies, the parts, and then I'll do the work for them. I learned from my parents. They have always helped me out through the years and when they could and with what they could. So in case you were wondering, that's the case. Anyway, this is all done, and my daughter can start driving her Jeep again.